Veux-tu danser avec moi?
And today we're talking about planning your first TV commercial, but in a lot of ways, I think we're going to touch on a few different types of spots, and maybe just like how what the ad buy is for a project might influence some of your choices. So, Josh, you want to kick it off?
Well, in Canada at least, and I'm sure there's similar things in the US, there are specific regulations about what can and cannot be on TV. So, for example, we do a fair bit of TV commercials for restaurant brands, and you cannot show someone drinking alcohol on camera. And you cannot even imply that they are drinking alcohol on camera. That's one consideration specific to restaurant chains, but for every industry, I'm sure for the healthcare industry, you can speak to that as issues. The toy industry, we've both work with toy companies. There's a lot of things that you need to consider.
Yeah, I think industry specific aside, and but it's worth mentioning that like you need to check general rules, but then also stuff specific for your industry. Like you said, we've both worked in toys. There's a bunch of toy specific stuff in pharma and healthcare stuff. There is a ton of regulations and different in Canada and the States, and sometimes depending on who the audience is. For it, we worked in video games. There's a whole kind of rating system and regulation, and even across the board, just like things like sort of legal lines, and minimum sizes for legal lines, disclaimers. I think the takeaway is be aware of regulations, and this can apply to web too, but for TV just everything gets so much more scrutiny. So be aware of regulations, but then also it's just you need to, because it's a very hard deadline with a very like hard ad buy, and you can't swap things out the same way you can on the web, is be sure to build in that time for legal review.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I think that's where you and I both end up being good production partners for our clients, because having worked in those industries, we sort of have already learned what those rules are. And so we can sort of remind the client like, hey, we have an SOP, or we have a sort of checklist anytime we're starting a new project, and legal line is up there. Like, do we need to have legal lines for this concept? And we sort of know based on the industry what the regulations are going to be that might affect the concept the most.
In my experience, just getting responses from legal can take longer than from other stakeholders. So like that's one of the things we'll flag right off the jump is, okay, I'm seeing from the script, we're going to need a legal line for this. Your call to action is this, like, has that been approved by legal, to like get those legal procedures happening right from the jump.
So the other thing that you mentioned earlier on, which I think we wanted to get into, was about rates. That talent rates are going to be different for broadcast versus online. This includes things like the actors that are appearing in your spot, also the voiceover talent, even your musical score. Sometimes there's different licensing, whether it is for web or for broadcast.
Yeah, and sometimes it's not just web or broadcast, but it can be different. Like sometimes there's different rates for web with media buy, without media buy. Just because you have the appropriate rights for the medium, you have to be able to prove it sometimes. Like there's some stock music sites, for example, where it's subscriptions, where they say, okay, you have the rights for broadcast, but they don't give you a specific document stating the clearance for a particular track. And some broadcasters will actually request the paperwork for that and talent clearances. So it's to make sure you're always grabbing those is really important. And I would say it's good practice, because we've done stuff that's just for web with no media buy, but sometimes the agency didn't necessarily ask for that up front, but then like down the road, the end client will say, oh, hey, can you show us the clearances just so we're covered legally? So I think that's a good tip always, is to make sure you get the talent clearances in writing, make sure you have paperwork on having the rights to use the track.
Oh yeah, that's a great point. And if we take like a few steps back here, everything we've been talking about so far was much more on the like specific technical side of things, or just like the planning out your concept. But from a big picture perspective, developing a creative campaign for television is quite different than developing projects for web. And both in terms of the production value, the expectations around production value are much higher, and your audience is going to be a much wider audience. So those considerations should definitely be reflected in your creative treatment or in the project that you're developing. Certainly, with any project that you're doing, the distribution platform should inform the creative approach you're taking. And basically, the way that I think about it is that the video that you are making is going to fit between other videos that the audience is watching. So if they're watching an HBO show and then your video comes on and it's filmed on a cell phone, that really like stands out as a bad juxtaposition. It reflects your brand poorly and seems like a low quality kind of production. That if you flip that though and have a high production value that feels like a commercial and you try to throw it up on TikTok or Instagram Reels, it's going to perform terribly because you're not in the right place. It's not matching the medium, and it's going to feel like an ad and people are going to turn away very quickly. So I think it's important to consider the medium when you're developing the creative approach.
That makes sense. So what are our key takeaways?
Key takeaways are really get legal involved, understand the rules around whatever the messaging is that you're trying to create specific to your industry, developing a creative that suits the platform, and allowing a little bit of extra time at the delivery phase for the clearances and getting the video from the production company to air takes some time.
Yeah, and I'll add one more, which is be aware of the tech specs. I know you said that like, the trafficker can bounce it back, but you don't want to be troubleshooting a bunch of technical specs at the last minute. So that's another one where I would say be proactive, make sure your stuff is delivered and done to the right specs from the jump.